Oh, you couldn't get the
I couldn't get the doors closed.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. All right. I'm gonna get loud. I'm gonna get loud. All right. All right. So we are. So Louise is still recuperating. So Julie's filling in. So we want to thank Julie for filling in for Louise. But Louise did say, "I want my job back when I can." So we appreciate Julie filling in and Louise's desire to serve in this way. So Julie also wanted me to mention while she's here that it's not too late to sign up for the Smithfield shopping trip that's on September 24th. They have a blast every year. So if you want to sign up for that and go with the ladies on the bus and have a good time, make sure you do that. She just wanted me to make sure. September 24th. And they have very good items to buy for our care directors over there. If you want to buy gifts.
Really? And ministers?
No, just care directors.
It's a care director section.
I should have
They have a care director there in Smithfield.
I don't even think that's a real title for anything.
Oh my goodness.
Wow. I used to care about Karen. All right. Okay, so we're going to sing because we always need to know more about Jesus. All right? Right? We need to know more about Jesus. Okay, let's sing, y'all. Thanks, Julie. Thank you, Julie. All right. This is an interesting trivia question today.
Oh boy. Is it about the song?
Huh?
Is it about the song?
No. It's about you.
Hey, that might be good.
An earthquake. Okay, so in 1886.
That was before my time.
Oh, it was? Okay. An earthquake occurred, and it's the largest earthquake recorded in the southeast of all time.
Southeast.
In southeast of the United States. You have to raise your hand if you know what city it was in. It was a 7.6 on the Richter scale. Miss Louise?
Was it Charleston?
It was Charleston, South Carolina. 1886, I did not even know that. Now,
I didn't either, I was shocked.
oh, yeah. So for a little bit of extra credit, you just get it, you can pat yourself on the shoulder. What staff member lived in Charleston for a while? Does anybody know what staff member lived in Charleston for a while?
1986?
Not to 1886.
There's only one of those.
That would have been
Who is
Steve.
that supposed to be? Who on our staff? Karen?
Gail.
No.
Steve.
What did you say?
Celeste.
Celeste.
Ah.
Celeste lived in Charleston for a while. Yep. Do you know who Celeste is?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. So this goes to Louise, and I wanted to remind you of the sign-up sheet for the food is next Wednesday during Bible study. We'll have a lunch and a little end of the summer party, just to get together.
Really?
Yes, next Wednesday. So don't forget to sign up for the luncheon next Wednesday during Bible study time. Okay, Miss Donna, you ready?
I think so.
Poor Donna didn't have electricity on Sunday and her garage would not open. So she had to walk to church.
Uphill?
Uphill in the snow.
You can sit down downstairs.
I was trying to be funny.
Just
funny is
washed
your
my
job.
hair, it was all curly, and the dryer went off, and I was like, took me just work trying to figure, I said, it's a good thing I didn't have to go get Shirley. And then I went to come to church, and then I realized the garage door's not gonna open. So I had to come, my husband had to bring me, and she did mine. So, and now we're back to norm, so. Okay, but I'm still having a problem seeing, so, you know, as you get older, you get wrinkles. Well, I have a wrinkle in my eye, so go figure. Of all places to get a wrinkle. So that makes it blurred, so just bear with me. Maybe in a couple of weeks, I'll be better reading. But a blonde is sick of all the blonde jokes. A blonde woman decides that she is sick and tired of all the blonde jokes and how all blondes are perceived as stupid. So she decided to show her husband that blondes are really smart. While her husband is off at work, she decides that she's going to paint a couple of the rooms in the house. The next day, right after her husband leaves for work, she gets down to the task at hand. Her husband arrives home at 5:30 and smells the distinct smell of paint. He walks into the living room and finds his wife lying on the floor in a pool of sweat. He noticed that she's wearing a ski jacket and a fur coat, and at the same time, he goes over and asks her if she's okay. She replied, yes. He asked what she is doing. She replied that she wanted to prove to him that not all blonde women are dumb, and she wanted to do it by painting the house. He then asked her why she had a ski jacket over her fur coat. She replied that she was reading the directions on the paint can, and it said, for best results, put on 2 coats. I only have one. This is just inspiration. I only brought you one joke. I figured you couldn't handle any more of that. All right, what have I learned in life? Is that for every inch of sadness lies a foot of happiness ahead. I've learned that the simplest of times bring the grandest of pleasure, and the hardest goodbyes often lead to the best hellos. I've learned that crazy chances guide us to the unexpected discovery that tough times unveil the sincerity of people. I learned that you have to hold on to your smile every day and free yourself of the things that make you frown.
Well, there are times I wish I could free myself from the things and people that make me frown. Hey, Steve!
That's not how.
That was my attempt at comedy as well. I will say the best jokes are the ones where the delivery, the payoff is at the very end of a long story. You know, you're like following your way, and then the punchline comes. So more of those, Miss Donna. I like those the best.
I've still got plenty.
Oh, good. Good.
If I can see them now.
That's right. You'll have to memorize them after that, which is always easy.
That's scary.
Yes, that would be harder to read then. So, glad you guys could be with us today. We are coming to the end of the summer, as is mentioned already. Going to have a little festival next week for that. So sign up to bring some food so everybody can enjoy, except me. I will be in the South. We're going to make a road trip, my wife and I, down to Louisiana. Haven't been back there since I was born. So I'm going to go check it out, see what it looks like out there. Heard there's a lot of gators. So if I find one, I'll let you know. Or you'll find out. One way or the other. So it should be a good adventure. So let's get into Esther. We are almost, I guess this would make the halfway point, even though chapter 10 is fairly short. There are 10 chapters in the book, and we're in chapter 5 together today, even though we're on week 6. So that can be confusing, but that's where we are. And so we're about halfway through in the story of Esther, which is, in my opinion, one of the top 10 stories ever told. You've probably heard of the movie titled The Greatest Story Ever Told. I think that's a good term for the gospel story. If you pay close attention to just about any story in human history, it has shades of the gospel in it, which makes things fun for preachers, because we're always looking for metaphors and illustrations that connect with Jesus' story. You see that all through the Old Testament especially. We've talked about that a lot as we've been going through Exodus. And I would say Esther's story is probably, if not the second greatest story, one of the greatest stories told. Certainly is something that would be a riveting movie, even if you know how the thing ends, because of all of the drama and the violence, and most importantly, the bravery that we see taking place in the story. Steve-O.
One of the musicals at Sight and Sound is Esther.
I was going to ask if
Yes.
you've seen a movie or a play based on this story. And of course, Sight and Sound is a famous playhouse in Pennsylvania.
Lancaster.
Lancaster is how you say it, not Lancaster.
Right.
Lancaster.
Lancaster.
One of the best Christian playhouses, if not the best in the U.S., exists there. They have an immersive experience, so I've been told. I've not been able to experience it for myself. I know there's a trip that's being planned, right, in the works, for you guys to go on to experience play there. Do you know what the play is?
David.
David. Well, there you have it. That would be kind of neat. You guys are David experts since we've been spending so much time looking at his life before Esther. But then there's the play that they've done on Esther's life as well. So maybe that'll come back around and that'll be another trip in the future. But an amazing story. And you have these cliffhangers too. And I think if you look at the blank space between chapters 4 and 5, that's probably one of the most, I guess you would say, pregnant white spaces in the whole Bible. It's just full of like anticipation, right? This is the spot when you get to the end of the Batman episode, and there's a cliffhanger, and it says, we'll see you next week, same bat time, same bat channel. So here we are, finding out what happens after Esther has been invited to rise to the occasion of the moment such as this, that God has prepared for Esther, and Mordecai has really asked her to consider seriously. And if you'll remember in chapter 4, this is where Mordecai is trying to get the word to Esther about what's happening, the danger that exists for her people, the Jews, and her response being very careful, saying, hey, if I do this, I want you to know I'm risking my life. And then Mordecai is basically saying, I understand that's true, but God's going to save his people one way or the other. Why not be a part of the solution? And so she makes a decision to do that. And that's where we leave it. So Esther now I believe during this white space in between chapters 4 and 5, we can kind of guess what she's doing in the midst here, and we get some insight, I think, on how we do this kind of thing from a passage in Isaiah. So we'll actually look at Isaiah for a little bit before we get back into Esther. So Esther is drawing upon her source of strength. Source of strength. Esther said she was going to go through with it to approach King Ahasuerus and ask for him to listen to her in an untimely way, because you basically have the opportunity maybe once a year, even as the king's spouse, to approach the king without invitation. And if you try to do that outside of those times, then unless the king extends his scepter towards you, basically the people, his secret service, are under the command to kill whoever doesn't receive this scepter. So Esther's picturing this, and she's asking people to fast and pray for her while she's doing the same thing. So she's drawing upon her source of strength. She's already asked that the Jews would fast and pray. Those are 2 more blanks. And she would naturally be doing the same. She wouldn't be asking others to do it if she wasn't doing it herself.
Those are filled in for us.
Oh, I'm sorry. All the ones that are underneath there?
Just fast
Just
and
fast and
pray.
Okay. Esther had courage, but she also had wisdom. She knew that she needed more than just courage in this situation. If she just had courage, she would rush right in to the king and say, "All right, King Xerxes, I'm the finest woman in all of Persia. You said it yourself. You married me. Now you're going to listen to me." Now, if she had rushed in there like that, could have been trouble. You've seen how he acted with his previous wife, right? So she didn't do that. She had the wisdom to wait, that's a blank, on the Lord, and allow him to guide her thoughts and frame her words to be spoken to the king. This is such a crucial thing. I know this is true for me. Anybody who's been in any kind of position of leadership, which is everybody in this room, whether you are a parent or a grandparent or a friend, you're put in times and places where you should take the lead and maybe try to influence someone else in some way or another. And the way you approach that position can be determined by how much wisdom you have to wait on figuring out what to say and how to say it. So in the waiting period, God not only works in our hearts, but also in the hearts of others surrounding the situation. I think it's in the Proverbs where it talks about a word aptly spoken is like a apple of gold, I think is what it says. It's a precious thing. So saying the right thing at the right time is what we're after here. And I think this is the kind of wisdom that Esther is seeking. Not only that, she also wants God to give those who will be her audience wisdom. So this is where that waiting period and the time of prayer and fasting really means something. Isaiah describes the kind of effect that this type of thing can have on us when we wait for the Lord. Isaiah 40:31, this is a famous passage of Scripture. It says, "Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." So there's 4 things that are mentioned here that happen as a result of our hoping or waiting on the Lord. Depending on which translation, you'll have different ways where that is interpreted. Number 1, we gain new strength. That's a blank. That's the first thing mentioned there, renew your strength. So then we're exchanging our weaknesses for the strength that God provides in our situation. Number 2, we get a better perspective. Well, where's that from? Well, where it talks about soaring on wings like eagles. What perspective do eagles have when they're soaring? High up, right? Not only that, the eyesight of an eagle is pretty remarkable. On a clear day, they can see miles and miles longer than we can. And so that's the perspective that we're looking for. The bird's eye view of a situation that we may feel like we're in the middle of, not just any bird, an eagle eye. That kind of perspective is what we're looking for. And that's what Isaiah is saying. Soar on wings like eagles. Then we store up extra energies, number 3. Run and not get tired, right? Notice that is future tense here. When we encounter that the thing that we are waiting on the Lord for, once that comes, we will have it. We'll have the strength at the time when we need it, because our strength is renewed based on the fact that we've chosen to wait and trust and hope in the Lord first. So storing up extra energy, run and not get tired. Then the 4th thing, deepen our determination to persevere, which is where you get walk and not be faint. Persevere. And so since God's work is invisible, as we see it all through the book of Esther, we began talking about how Esther is even controversial in its placement in Scripture because it does not mention God by name at all throughout the whole thing. And so that was one of the qualifications. Karen, did I miss something?
No, but you're about to.
I'm about to miss something?
Keep reading.
Oh no. I'm kind of worried to keep reading. I hope I didn't make a rude typo.
Wasting.
Oh, wasting. Not wasting as in around your waist. W-A-S-T. Not W-A-I-S-T. So if you are watching online, you're missing all the fun. But I misspelled wasting with wasting. So,
What are we wasting time?
I mean,
I'm
hey,
sorry, I'm wasting.
sometimes we feel like both are happening, right? We're wasting and wasting time is the blank. Time.
Okay.
Not wasting calories, but wasting time. So, since God's work is invisible, the waiting can sometimes feel like it's unproductive, like it's not really amounting to anything because we don't see anything like right in front of us that is a direct consequence of our prayer or our fasting or our just sitting there looking like we're not doing anything, right? But God is still in the midst of that, and we see all through the book of Esther that God was working. And I would imagine the earliest part of Esther and what God was doing was a response to prayers that God anticipated that Esther would later pray. This is how God works in our prayers. That not only are the things that we're facing today a result of prayers we're praying today, but there are some circumstances we face today that are a result of prayers we may have prayed years ago. Because God is able to move around back and forth in time, and our prayers have that kind of effect as well. So, this is why the enemy would have you to believe, or this is what the enemy would have you to believe, that God is not working and that we are wasting time, but the opposite is true. Just a few verses later in Isaiah, chapter 41, verses 10 and 13, it says, "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." And then verse 13, "For I am the Lord your God, who takes hold of your right hand and says to you, do not fear, I will help you." These are promises to hold on to when we're seeking God in the same way that Isaiah has described. And as in, we are hoping in the Lord. These are all things that hopefully God was reassuring Esther with as she was waiting and fasting for 3 days, we know, from what she invited the others to do with her. She said, "Fast with me for 3 days, and then I will go." That's what's happening in the white space between chapters 4 and chapter 5. It's a quiet place. It's a place of meditation, a place of prayer and waiting. But there's a whole lot of activity that results from that quiet space in between. It's a symbol in Esther that God is at work even while invisible.
I didn't get that
Visible is
word.
a blank there.
Invisible.
Yes, the white space is another symbol in Esther, or for Esther, that God is at work even while invisible, or in the book of Esther, basically is what I'm trying to say. So maybe you're facing one of those times in your life. It's kind of in between major events or something like that. Or you're concerned about something in the future. And it just feels like a white space, right? But this is the time for you to seek God's help, to seek His wisdom, to continue to pray. This is where you're doing your battle. Even before the battle comes. So that's what we see from the blank in between the two. Be encouraged by the words found in Psalm 32, 6-8, that God answers. Here's what it says in that psalm. Psalm 32, 6-8. God answers. Therefore, let all the faithful pray to you while you may be found. Surely the rising of the mighty waters will not reach them. You are my hiding place. You will protect me from trouble and surround me with songs of deliverance. And I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my loving eye on you. God answers. And when He does, when He's watching over you, you may not even be aware of it. The eye makes no noise when it moves. It would be kind of strange if it did, right? Yeah. So then I would know exactly when someone's looking at me when they should be looking at me. I heard you looking at me. But God's eyes are watching us, and it's something that is largely unnoticed, right? So God reassures her with that, with these thoughts of His providence. And now Esther is ready to step into the presence of the king calmly, that's hard to say, and wisely. Calmly and wisely. C-A-L-M-L-Y. It's a weird word. But she's ready to go, is what I'm trying to say. Esther 5, verse 1. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall facing the entrance. And when he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, of course he was pleased with her and held out to her the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. Her life is spared. Right? She's standing before the king. Now, here's the moment she was anticipating this whole time, that she was afraid of at first. I doubt she was still afraid when she was actually standing there because of the preparation she put into it. And of course, if the king had not raised his scepter, she would have been killed on the spot. And then again, God can handle anybody. Right? So there's a blank. God can handle anyone. So it could be your husband, your wife, your boss, your kids, your enemies, anybody. Proverbs 21:1 says, in the Lord's hand, the king's heart is a stream of water that He channels toward all who please Him. There's no one that we have to be intimidated by if we are in God's will and we're seeking His wisdom. No amount of power will overcome. Nothing to be afraid of in terms of other people, per se, if we are willing to trust God in those circumstances. And we've done the preparation ahead of time when we face those circumstances where we may be opposed by people. All right, so that's a key verse. We mentioned that at the beginning of our study of Esther, Proverbs 21:1, because we see how much these apparent free will decisions of these pagan kings still played into the will of the providential Father. Continues in Esther 5:3. Then the king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given you." This guy likes to promise stuff to women. He did that to Queen Vashti as well, but she didn't take him up on it. He is so delighted by her. He wants to give her anything that will make her happy. The guy's in love. So this would be her moment to bring down the roof on Haman, right? This would be an easy time for her to say, okay, get rid of that guy. But she doesn't do that, does she? A wise woman who understands the value of timing, that's a blank, timing, comma instead of a period. She isn't in a hurry, and she isn't vengeful. Why? She's got wisdom, right? She has been waiting on the Lord. She sought the Lord's counsel. If she were to just ask for Haman's death or dismissal or any of those types of things, it would not have taken care of an even bigger problem that exists, and that's the edict that has already gone out to the whole kingdom about the annihilation of the Jewish people, which would have, in that time, been irreversible. So there's a larger issue at play, and we're going to see how this comes around as we go through. But she's been waiting on the Lord. She's got this sense of timing that comes from God. So verse 4, if it pleases the king, this is her reply, let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet I have prepared for him. This is great. This is where things get really interesting, right? Because we know the backstory, right? We know the tension that exists in the room as Haman and this crew arrives and this banquet's going to happen. But they're clueless. Now it's interesting, she was fasting and planning a banquet at the same time, right? She says, I've prepared this banquet. That means she's doing all the preparations and while she's going through this 3-day fast. That's pretty good restraint. She doesn't burst into tears and point the finger at Haman. Instead, she calmly invites both the king and Haman to a banquet, and the king goes for it. I mean, the king likes banquets. We've seen it, right? The guy knows how to party for like a year or two. Verse 5, bring Haman at once, the king said, so that we may do what Esther asked. So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. So she's successfully used by God because she was in tune with God's will. And we see this because she's not only just doing the right thing, she's doing the right thing at the right time. It's easy to get used to being a Christian and predicting God's will. But the more we think, assume at least, without seeking it, the more we assume that we are in the middle of God's will, the less unpredictable God becomes, or the more predictable God becomes in our life, which translates to more boredom in our walk with Christ. You're making the connection? The more we think, you know what, God thinks the same way I do, the more predictable God becomes in our life, the less we seek God's wisdom, even if it may differ from our own way of seeing things. And the more that happens, the more predictable everything becomes, the more bored we are with following Him. Because we're not actually following Him. We're following our idea of God as opposed to the God who can oppose us at times, challenge us at times, enthrall us at times with the way that He invites us into His adventure. The greatest story ever told. So she's not doing that. And we shouldn't either. Don't predict God's will. Always seek it out as best we can, especially in these tough situations. Here's examples of how that can be done in life that Swindoll shares in this chapter. We would pray that God would help us find a mate, but God wants to surprise us with the joy of living single life sold out to Him. We would pray that God would take care of the problems in our marriage by taking care of our spouse, but God is really interested in working on us instead. We would pray that God would change our rebellious child, but God wants to confront us on being a reason for our child's rebellion. Oh my goodness. We would pray that God would use us in our jobs, but God really wants us to move out of our job and into another location. This is just an example Swindoll is giving. That wasn't my idea. God has to get out of the box to be the Lord of our lives. And that's what we're talking about here. Never predicting ahead of God, but always seeking His counsel. So the king knew that Esther had to be bothered by something to risk her life and approach him unannounced, so he brings the matter up again. It's not a simple thing that she just strolled into his throne room. He notices her showing up. He's delighted to see her. I think part of the delight and the reason why he promised as much as he did to her is because he's concerned for her. What would cause her to take this type of risk, knowing the rule among Persia and approaching the king. So verse 6, as they were drinking wine, the king again asked Esther, now what is your petition? It will be given you. And what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. And so Esther replied, so they're at this banquet now, and they're enjoying their time together, and the king is asking this question again, and Esther replies, my petition and my request is this, that the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them, and then I will answer the king's question. All right, so either they were at a second banquet, or they're just, pre-gaming the banquet ahead of time as they're drinking wine.
Keep on partying, I guess.
This guy knows how to have a good time. He has a lot of wine. So he's concerned about what she wants, and she reiterates the plan. She's still trusting God's timing, and she waits one more day. One more day. Now, easily, she could have just asked for, no, we're not going to sing at this point. It's lesson time. It's not sing time. I'm just playing. No. She could have easily asked at this point, and the king is basically putty in her hands, as we can see. But she still has the wisdom to wait, the patience to wait even more. We'll find out why in just a moment. Meanwhile, Haman, the guy we love to hate, the antagonist, is strutting around on cloud 9 at the time, verse 9. Haman went out that day, happy and in high spirits, singing like Steve. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself, and he went home, calling together his friends and Zeresh, his wife. Now, why is Haman so excited? He's excited because he knows this banquet's all about him, right? And he's excited about that, but he's distracted for a moment, and he's like, I'm not going to let this ruin my day. He's strutting out of the palace. He's bursting with pride and ego. He runs into Mordecai, who apparently refuses to respect him. This man needs some respect. Here we go with some songs. Last time we saw Mordecai, he couldn't go into the king's gate because he was in sackcloth, right? So this was the picture of mourning that we talked about, part of the Eastern culture there. Now, obviously, at this point, he's changed clothes. Most likely, he's sensing God at work. He got the response from Esther to pray and fast. And I would imagine in that time frame, in that white space between chapter 4 and 5, Mordecai is ready. Now he's changed over from mourning into preparedness to continue to be faithful to God and see what happens next. So even after the edict, Mordecai is not intimidated by Haman. Right? So this has already gone out that all these people will be executed because they would not bow. Mordecai still refuses to do so. But Haman bites his tongue, heads home to gloat some more. Verse 11, Haman boasted to his friends and his wife about his vast wealth, his many sons, all the ways the king had honored him, and how he had elevated him above all the other nobles and officials, yada, 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 blah, 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 me. You can imagine everyone rolling their eyes, having to listen to this guy. But nobody's going to offend him because he's still the guy with what? The king's seal. Remember that? The signet ring. The king's seal.
seal.
Yeah, the signet ring. This was the tool that the king gave him to use in order to enact the edict that called for the extermination of a whole race of people out of Persia. So it would be nothing for him to use that little device to demand the execution of whoever he didn't like, even if they were friends and family. So he is gloating, and the family's like, oh, great, we're going to have to listen to this guy. He's got that stupid ring on. That's the picture that's happening here. And so with all of his wealth and power, you think that Haman would be satisfied. But this is an insight into the character of people who are like this, narcissists. They are never satisfied. If everyone is not bowing to him, then the one person who's not will become his sole worry and focus. It requires complete obedience, complete bowing down in order for this person to be happy. Maybe not even then. But that's the situation that Haman is facing as a narcissist. Is just cannot be happy even with a banquet supposedly being thrown for him because of this guy. So he says in verse 12, "That's not all," Haman added. "I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave. And she has invited me along with the king tomorrow, but all this gives me no satisfaction, as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate." So, finally, his wife has had enough, speaks up, says something like, "Do something about it," right? "Sick of hearing your belly aching, Mr. Ring Guy. So what are you going to do?" And she gives him a suggestion, verse 14. His wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Have a pole set up, reaching to the height of 50 cubits, and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then go with the king to the banquet and enjoy yourself." It's a different time back then, you know. This suggestion delighted Haman, and he had the pole set up. So Haman loves the idea, 75-foot high gallows.
How'd they get him up there? That's what I want to know.
Probably a pulley system of some kind, you know. I don't know. I mean, it's like maybe a pole vault thing. You just
75 feet.
just put it through the guy and then just kind of stand him up. I don't know. But 75 feet high is a pretty significant structure. 7.5 stories tall. It's a bit of an overreaction, I would say. You know, I mean, it would be a lot easier if it was just a 10-foot tall, and it would still do the job, right? But no, it's got to be one that's taller than probably anything else around Persia. So these gallows, as is translated in the scripture, for the Persians were actually poles or stakes to impale people on. Obviously, as you saw being described in verse 14, impale people. What's interesting, though, is this is a precursor to the cross. The Romans got the idea of crucifixion from the Phoenicians, who earlier learned the practice from the Persians themselves. So the term crucifixion or impaling, those were two forms of execution. Even the Romans used impaling at times, but they definitely used crucifixion a lot more often. They preferred that. It was almost like that was an upgrade from the original Persian impaling. And this is what led to Scripture talking about how Jesus was hung on a tree. The Romans developed the practice of driving nails through the hands or the wrist, but the Persians skipped the nails and simply drove the pole through the body, as if you didn't already need the description. So Haman went to sleep that night, consumed with hatred, listening to the thump and bump of construction workers working through the night to build 75-foot tall structure to put Mordecai on, which is why Esther wanted to wait another day to confront Haman. Now, how would Esther know that this would happen? She wouldn't. But what she does have is insight from the time that she has asked for God's wisdom to know when to say what. And had she rushed into the idea of getting rid of Haman before this conversation that Haman had with his wife and his friends, then this structure would not have been assembled. And you'll see what happens with it later. But that's part of how the story played out the way it did with God's timing. To be continued. Next Fat Week, same Fat Channel. We will see what happens. Here's some lessons to be learned before we're done. When preparing on an unprecedented event, wait on the Lord to get involved. God will work on us and others while we wait. The bigger the decision, the longer the wait. Restrain your tendency to move things along. Just a good practical way to approach large decisions in life. Wait on God, hope on God, ask for God's wisdom when preparing for an unprecedented event. When working through an unpleasant situation, trust the Lord for enduring patience. Think of Esther's restraint towards Haman. So when you're having to wait in order to do something wisely, it's going to be uncomfortable at times. And you may want to play a card that you've already been dealt because it's a trump card and you'd love to be able to just deal it. But in reality, you need to wait because the hand is going to improve later, for those of you who sinfully play cards. You have strategy when it comes to when to play your hand a certain way based on the situation. Same thing's true in life. The decisions we make, the times in which we make the decisions and move require some wisdom and humility, restraint. Causes us to sometimes have to push down emotions that we feel like we would want to just lash out with. So that's how you work through an unpleasant situation. Then the third thing, when standing before an unprincipled enemy, ask the Lord for invincible courage. When standing before an unprincipled enemy, ask the Lord for invincible courage. Haman was not willing to play by the rules. He wanted to make his own rules. Esther was working within this evil system. The Persian government was an evil government. But she was working within that evil system with wisdom from God in order to save her people, and which led towards ultimately the Messiah, but so many incredible things that have come from those people's sins. All right, so good lesson to learn when it comes to decision making and finding yourself in different situations that you face. Hopefully it was helpful to you. Before we get to praying, let me mention a few birthdays that we got going on coming up. Are we done with the stream?
I can.
Yeah, we can. Bye. So coming up we have